Welcome, I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher. From our BizVision studios in the UK, you're watching the BVTV network. I love music of many types, not just sitting listening, but also as an accompaniment, say, to a romantic dinner with my wife. And it's then that my preference is either piano or violin. Both seem to go so well with candlelight. But the real story I want to reveal to you today is not the making of the music, but the making of the instrument that makes the music. Known in the classical music world as the ambassador to ancient traditions, my guest has made a name for himself as the maker of fine, original violins, using the secrets of the ancient masters. It's not just the secrets of design which have helped him to gain success, though, but the secrets of business. These days, he passes on his knowledge of crafting and selling classical instruments to other ambitious creators, giving them the tools they need to get guaranteed results. So let's go talk violins and businesses with Dmitry Badiarov. Welcome, Dmitry.
Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you for such a lovely invitation, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this message. I'm really excited about this.
I'm just as excited. Now, you're in The Hague, aren't you?
Yes, I'm in The Hague, the Netherlands.
Yeah, and we're just almost straight across the water in Northumberland. So I'll wave out to the window at you as we chat through. Dmitry, I'm delighted that you're kindly guesting on our enterprising BBTV network. In this show, I'll be talking to Dmitry in three parts. First, I'll ask him about the world of instrument making, what goes into making one of his beautiful and sought-after violins. Let's get the story behind the story, the passion, the commitment, the knowledge. In part two, we'll move to talking about the learning and the understanding that's needed to turn that craftsmanship ability into a profitable business. What does the craftsperson need to know about business, and how important has that learning been to Dmitry? In part three, I'll bring Dmitry back to talking about his vision for the world of instrument makers, how he helps them, and where he now feels his purpose lies. But Dmitry, before we get into our three-part talk, can you please briefly introduce yourself to my viewers and listeners? Who is Dmitry Badiarov? What are you proud about having achieved? And where does your passion lie? Over to you.
Wonderful. Yes, so my name is Dmitry Badiarov, and I'm best known as instrument maker in the world. So this is where my biggest achievements lie, in the domain of creating very high quality concert grade instruments of the violin family. And I'm best known for the reconstruction of the ancient masters' concepts to recreate instruments the way they did in the 16th or 17th or 18th century. And using that systems, instrument makers today can create really robust, acoustically and artistically robust instruments to help their customers, their musicians, to fulfill their musical dreams. And they can also use these concepts to create even very modern instruments, but still on this foundation of ancient culture. I'm really passionate about this, and I can talk about this forever. And the second thing I'm best known for is the reconstruction of the predecessor of the modern day violoncello. We call it violoncello da spalla. And currently it is picking up momentum. More and more instrument makers and more amazing musicians are rediscovering this instrument and the ocean of untouched repertoire they can play on that instrument. So these are the two things I'm really passionate about. And on top of this, these days, I'm really passionate about helping other instrument makers to build businesses, build instrument making workshops that they will love.
Yeah. Excuse my layman's knowledge of this, but you know, this ancient traditions you're talking about, is that the same that Stradivarius would have used?
Great question, Malcolm. I think this is kind of knowledge that would definitely resonate to Antonio Stradivari or Guarneri del Gesso or any great instrument makers of the past, because this knowledge is something that is deeply rooted in the tradition, and there are historical documents speaking about that knowledge. Very interestingly, this knowledge, this ancient culture, has been lost even by the Italians in the 18th century. So there is an Italian book, a manual about how to design and build instruments, which is published in 1783, written by an Italian instrument maker and one of the famous ones. And from this book, we can see that he didn't have access to the earlier knowledge, which I was able to recover in the past 28 years. So yes, these concepts would definitely sound very familiar to Antonio Stradivari.
It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Dmitry, let's start our talk in part one. Tell us about the world of instrument making. What goes into making one of your beautiful and sought after violins? For example, how long does it take to make one? Let's get the story behind the story, the passion, the commitment, the knowledge, and perhaps sometimes loneliness to achieving what your success.
Yes, let's do that. Definitely.
So, how long does it take to make one of those beautiful violins of yours?
Yeah, on average, it takes about 200 to 300 hours to create a concert-grade violin. That's what it takes me, and that's what it takes normally to instrument makers. So speaking about 200, 300 hours, it is typically 1.5 months or 2 months of work. That's what it takes. And besides this, of course, there are so many different skills involved in the making of these beautiful instruments. So it's interesting that we started our discussion with the ancient masters' thought process, and I would like to dive a little bit more into this. Potentially, it might be interesting for our listeners, how I discovered this thing. You see, in today's instrument making world, it is mainly about producing copies of the famous instruments from the past. So majority of instrument makers and even factories that produce up to 500,000 of violins per year, they essentially do the same thing. So they create copies of instruments, typically from posters of those instruments. And yes, it is a viable way of creating an instrument, a fine sounding and fine looking instrument. However, with all due respect to this amazing skill and craftsmanship and this method of constructing, building instruments, some time ago, I've decided to take a different route. After studying ancient masters' technical skills and woodworking methods and so forth, I decided to go deeper and try to rediscover what are the thoughts, what is the philosophy behind those enigmatic lines of a beautiful violin. What was the reason they gave the instrument that shape? And I believe that there were reasons, because the truth is the original masters didn't have instruments to copy. They had to recreate it. They had to build it upon something. So how all this started, that takes us all the way back to 1988 and 89. And I was very young then. I was still a student of St. Petersburg Conservatoire as a modern violinist. And I happened to be on a concert tour in Spain, in Merida, almost on the border with Portugal. And we spent 2 weeks there playing with Rostropovich, amazing world-famous cellist and conductor. It was absolutely fantastic experience. But now imagine yourself in open air theater, Roman theater, 2,000 years old. It is actually UNESCO site. It's beautiful. It's ruins, it's some columns, Corinthian columns, richly decorated, and rows of seats, and it's completely packed. Lots of people. I don't know how many hundreds of people, if not thousands of people sitting there. On stage, you see an orchestra. It's midnight, around July midnight, very warm. The sky is full of stars, and this scent of plants.
I'm there.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And yeah, I'm playing the violin and I feel so flabbergasted, enchanted, because we are playing outside, open air theater, but it sounds like the finest concert hall ever.
Yeah.
And it struck me at that moment that, look, the ancient masters knew something that the modern masters do not know. They knew something about acoustics, which they definitely used also in the instrument making. And I had a burning desire to find this out. What was that? And so this is essentially when my journey began. And ever since I was thinking about that. And then gradually I discovered books and treatises, and I've read lots of sources on acoustics and aesthetics of Renaissance and Baroque and Middle Age. And I've discovered this method that the instrument makers used. And so this is where my instrument making lies. And this is where I also want to lead other instrument makers and musicians also to realize that behind the violin, behind instrument making, it's not just model, it's not just measurements, it's not just technical data, but it is a rich, amazing culture, thousands of years of culture, everything that we call European today, culturally speaking, it is all in the violin.
Wow, that's a fascinating comment you just made there. Why do you say that? That it's all in the violin?
That's very interesting, because it took me another big commitment to actually approach closer. I see, in 1989, I was still in Russia, and I realized that I absolutely need to be in Europe. I need to be closer to the cultural roots of the violin, and I dreamt to move from Russia after I uprooted all the libraries, and I couldn't find any more books on violin making or aesthetics of the Renaissance or Middle Ages or Baroque period. I understood that I needed to be in Europe. So when I moved to Brussels in 1994, I walked into one of those antique book shops, and I discovered there a tiny book by Vitruvius on architecture, 10 books of architecture. And one of these books, book number 5, he speaks just about acoustics and about how to build perfectly sounding theater. Wow, how would you feel in my place? It was exactly the thing I wanted to find out, and there was a whole book exactly about this. And I started reading this, and I started experimenting immediately. I started drawing violins based on my findings. And that book, Vitruvius, describes how precisely to build perfectly sounding theater. And he also adds, these are the laws used by the skilled workmen who fashion musical instruments in order to bring them to the perfection of their proper concords. Yeah. And when I read this sentence, this line, I thought, wow, this is such clear instruction to instrument makers on how to design perfectly sounding instruments. And it really surprised me how on planet Earth, this was the first time I ever heard about this. Why instrument makers speak just about copying, or from actual instruments or from posters, but not about aesthetics, not about the laws of harmonics. And this culture, this ancient culture, has been known for thousands of years, because mind, Vitruvius published his book in the 6th century before Christ. And this is one of the most influential books on architecture ever published. It has been republished multiple times during the Middle Ages, during the Renaissance, even more, of course. And it was really known to a lot of artists and architects. And this is how I believe that knowledge also influenced instrument makers, the finest instrument makers, at least.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I started work in the theatre after I'd left school, and I was working in a 2,300 seater, and you could go on stage there and talk normally. The sound acoustic was so brilliant that you didn't need a microphone. Obviously, you needed a microphone when there was an audience in, because of the absorbing of the sound, but absolutely fascinating. Dmitry, before we move to part 2, I'd like to remind viewers and listeners of your website URL, which I have had a look, and I love that video at the very beginning on your website, where you've got rather an interesting workshop, haven't you, overlooking with a big window. You're not locked away into a basement, it's a beautiful...
Yeah, it's a beautiful workshop with a giant window indeed. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So let me just remind viewers and listeners of your URL, which is, viewers, you can see it on the screen behind me, badiarovviolins.com. But for listeners, let me spell that out. Badiarov is spelled Badiarov, Badiarov. Badiarov Violins. That's two V's in the second, in the middle there. Badiarovviolins.com. Dmitry, time for part two. Let's move to talking about the learning and understanding that is needed to turn that craftsmanship ability into a profitable business. What does the craftsperson need to know about business, and how important has that learning been to you?
This learning has indeed been really life-changing. And there are 5 elements to a expert instrument maker, successful expert instrument maker business. So there are 5 elements. So one of these elements, and of course, all starts with top quality sound. The sound in instruments is extremely important, needless to say, and everybody knows this. So that has to be definitely world-class. So the second thing, a craftsman creating beautiful musical instruments, concert quality instruments, need to know is the certain style in musical instruments, a style that is appealing to serious musicians. So it's about the woodwork. If the first step is about sound and having that ability to create any kind of sound that would help the fit musician, individual, unique musician aspirations. So the second part of the blueprint, so to speak, is getting the style in the instrument right, visual, artistic style right. So this third step that instrument makers need to know and be aware about this, because without this, it is very difficult to speak about a successful and profitable instrument making business that brings really joy and fulfillment, is the right pricing strategy. And I see a lot of instrument makers do not get this part right. So that is, they would look around themselves and see what the competition does, and then they will decide their pricing based on the competition. Yeah. Whereas it is actually not something that is really helping musicians, and there is a lot more to do. There's a very important work to do when it comes to pricing instruments correctly in such a way that it is a win-win situation. That is, It is easier for musicians to acquire those instruments, but it is also easier for instrument makers to generate more clients and run a profitable business. Very, very important. The fourth thing is about selling skills. And this is something that a lot of instrument makers would definitely benefit from, because the truth is, musicians definitely want to buy instruments. They want instruments, but they do not want to be sold. And very frequently, musicians are not fully aware what instrument they need. So an instrument maker definitely needs to understand deeply the deepest reasons why musicians need instruments. And this is the kind of skill that is, I call it the selling skill, is leading a conversation with the musician in such a way that musicians start to understand what actually they want and how that particular instrument maker can help them to achieve exactly what they want. And finally, the fifth step of expert instrument makers business blueprint is a certain system to bring in customers in a consistent manner. Without having enough customers, instrument making business cannot exist, or any business for that matter cannot exist without sufficient number of customers. And this is what I teach at my Authentic Instrument Makers Academy. So I'm teaching my clients, instrument makers, the expert instrument makers business blueprint, consisting of these 5 steps, which are absolutely vital. It is impossible to skip any one of them and still hope to run a successful instrument making business. So this is what I believe it takes business wise to run a successful instrument making workshop.
Yeah. So essentially what you're saying as well, every instrument should be customized, should be custom made or bespoke to the
Very true.
client. Yeah.
Yes, very true. Because the truth is, musicians do not want just instruments. Like if you ask a musician, so you want an instrument, period, or do you want an instrument because? And of course, it is because they have some dreams and some message to share. They want to achieve something. They want to feel something, and they want to make a contribution. And it is very important that an instrument maker understands precisely what an individual musician wants in order to be able to fulfill that musician's very unique aspirations, very frequently really unique aspirations, with total certainty. And the total certainty comes, of course, from solid knowledge of acoustic principles and solid craftsmanship technique, of course.
Brilliant. Yes, I followed you totally along there, because people are silly at times. They price wrongly. They try to price what the competitors doing, and forgetting about their brands, the work that has gone into it, the customizing. Absolutely brilliant.
Very true.
Yeah. Thanks, Dmitry. Now for part 3, I'll bring you back to talking about your vision for the business of instrument making. Let's talk about how you help those other aspiring instrument makers. It's not just the business, is it? Not the business bits or the process of the business. There's a lot more to it, isn't there? Motivation, inspiration. Where do you feel your purpose now lies, and how do you know? Will you know when you've reached that vision?
This is something that I think about every single day. What is my vision? What is my purpose in life? And my purpose in life very clearly is to help as many instrument makers as possible to become ambassadors to the ancient tradition. So to keep this ancient thought process, ancient masters thought process alive, help more musicians to become aware that behind the violin there is whole culture. It's not just millimeters. It's not just patterns. There is a lot of creativity in that. And violoncello da spalla is another thing that I'm really passionate about, so that more instrument makers become passionate about this and more musicians become passionate about this. And this culture doesn't vanish ever again. It would be a beautiful thing, in my opinion, when a lot of instrument makers are aware of this culture and passionate about this culture and bringing this culture to serve musical community in their countries. It will be a beautiful thing when a lot more musicians get inspired by the depth of thought and philosophy and culture built behind these beautiful models, these instruments, guitars or lutes or violins. It will be beautiful when musicians can share their message and tell something from the stage to the audiences, that there is a lot behind the violin, even if we just speak about small part as a bridge of the violin or a guitar. Would the listeners know why it is called bridge? Why it is called bridge in English, or in Italian il ponticello is the same thing, or in Spanish el puente? The thing is, there is a legend, there is a story, ancient story behind this. Look.
Go on.
In the times when there was not a violin didn't exist yet, but lutes definitely did. And lute has this pear-shaped or water drop-shaped body, whereas the bottom of the body contains a geometrical figure known as vesica Pisces, the two intersected circles. So this figure is present in a lot of religions and a lot of philosophies. Esoteric is a very esoterical figure. It's a symbolical figure. So it represents, on one side, it represents the universe, the world of the gods, if you will, and other side represents the humanity. And guess what? The bridge, this little piece of wood, connects the centers of the two worlds.
Fascinating. Absolutely.
Fascinating. And when I shared these stories with musicians, with my audiences, they were all transported. They were like in trance. They were like, wow, amazed by all these stories, and they wanted more and more. which is how I was able to grow my audiences when I was a performing musician. And this is how musicians can also share this culture and inspire a lot more people by building these bridges, literally, between themselves, the audiences, the music, and just lead people, inspire people to a better place.
Absolutely brilliant. I think the story behind the story, which you've kindly been given us today, is one of the most fascinating things. Now, before I sadly must leave the Netherlands, I just want to ask you one little extra question in there. Imagine that I've got, we have a lot of people looking for a new world, a new life, a new start in business, perhaps because they've got to because of COVID or furlough or redundancy and everything. And they're thinking, I love what Dmitry's saying there. I want to get into his academy and so on. How long do you think, and I know this is a hard question to answer, but from that, hearing what we're talking about now to actually producing their first instrument for sale, how long should they imagine that they need to allow themselves? I know it's a hard question.
The easy way to answer this question is they need to be aware that they have to put 100% commitment to doing what works and focus on this and trust and belief and approach this with a very positive mindset that yes, they can do. Even if they haven't started here, they need to approach this craft with a mindset that they are already world-class instrument makers, even if they are just starting. And even somebody asks them, wow, fantastic, since when are you doing this? It's all right to say, well, I haven't started yet, but it is already in my mind. So I have had students, instrument makers, who started literally from zero. They had just one instrument maybe built. And in a matter of 12 months, they went to creating a worldwide, internationally established instrument-making businesses, attracting customers from all around the world. And not only customers, they were getting featured in the news and even attracting instrument-making students to learn from them. So this is how how fast it can go. And some students took a little bit longer. Some students took 24 months. And yeah.
But all that's quite achievable, and I expect a lot of my silverpreneurs, that say people age 50 plus looking to start a new career, they'd be fascinated in the whole world of that you've been kindly telling us about, Dmitry. So just one reminder before I finish that Dmitry's URL for his website, do go along and have a fascinating look around. It really is there. And I'll repeat it. It's all the W's, of course. Badiarov, B-A-D-I-A-R-O-V, BadiarovViolins.com. Next time you sit down to listen to a great piece of music, or even that romantic dinner, take a moment to reflect what's gone into making that beautiful sound for your enjoyment, along with the entrepreneurship to deliver it. Thanks, Dmitry Badiarov, for a great interview.
My pleasure, Malcolm. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my message with your audiences.